At age 6, men came to my house, and my father took 8mm footage of it. My mother took the money from the men. I remember my mom being on the porch and being hand cash by each of the men. And then a rope was put around my neck, and the other end of the rope was tied to a tree. And each man up me and then would hand me to the next man. And I remember, I was really badly hurt. And I remember one of the men telling my dad, "You went too far, she's going to die." And I heard that. And I hoped I would die. But I looked over to my mother for comfort, and she just looked at me like I was an insect. She just looked at me like I was nothing. And that is when I wanted to die. It wasn't after the physical abuse. It was that emotional abuse that my mother just looked at me like I was nothing. So that instant had happened. And then my mother brought me in after I was so badly hurt by the group of men. And she bathed me. She put me in bed with clean sheets on it. And, I thought things were better. And then she abused me. That was obviously a long and horrible abuse that included emotional, physical, and sexual. And I was 6. I was always afraid of my parents, and I didn't know why, but I couldn't ever say I was afraid of my parents. So my sister died of cancer. She died of brain cancer. I know she died of the illness because I saw her in the hospital. My parents did not murder my sister. I know for sure my parents didn't murder my sister. What happened after she died, I think, is that the funeral home picked up her body, which is usual, pick up the body from the hospital. But what's unusual is they brought it to my childhood church. And in the middle of the night or in the very early hours of the morning, I was brought to my childhood church and outside, and that's where my sister's body was mutilated with a knife. The knife was placed in my hand, and abusers do that to make the child feel responsible for the abuse. That was a really hard memory for me because I couldn't imagine how did anyone get me to stab my sister with a knife, even though she was deceased. But when I finally remembered it, it was actually very simple. My father said, "Do it," and I did it. I knew that you had to do what my father said. My definition of satanic ritual abuse is that it is extreme abuse, physical, and that it involves multiple perpetrators and or multiple child victims, which mine did. My earliest memory is of being abused by my father. I was also abused by my mother. I was abused by other family members, grandparents. What I remember about it is that even though her body had been mutilated, and I'd had to watch and participate in that, which I also would consider satanic abuse. When I was put in the coffin with her body, I was glad to get to be close to her. I knew, it was the last time I could be close to her, and I remember touching her hair. And one reason I know it's true is if I were writing a story, if I were making up a story about a child being put in a coffin, I would never think that the child would be happy to be close to the corpse. But I didn't consider it a corpse. I considered it my sister's body. And I liked to get to touch her hair one last time. My parents led a complete double life, and they went to church 3 times a week. I was well-dressed at school. There were no bruises where they would have been detected. I didn't remember my abuse except for while it was going on, so I couldn't report it to anyone because when it was going on, I was around abusers, and I didn't remember it otherwise, even as a child. Some people with recovered memories remembered their abuse up to a certain age. No, mine was just while I was being abused. I remembered it. Otherwise, I wasn't aware of it. That enabled me to make good grades because, I didn't think about my abuse when I was at school. After the incident and before the funeral, I was made to have with the employee from the funeral home. I've tried to find out, I found out who the owner of the funeral home is, and I wasn't able to talk to him, even though the receptionist said she passed a message along. He's now retired. But I don't know if he was in on it anyway, because I have researched this some, so the death certificate has the person's name who was there at the time the funeral was officiated. But that could be a completely different person than the person who handled the body prior to it being put in the coffin. So it was a closed casket funeral. I will say after that happened, one thing I know that happened more often was my father would have with me at night. Another horrible memory, though, is because my sister and I were in the same room, is before she died, my father going to my sister's bed. I mean, both are just horrible. So one of the ways I was abused, and this is common in satanic ritual abuse, was by me being made to witness other children being abused. And one of the incidences that is without question satanic ritual abuse is I was told to bow down to Satan. Now, I didn't want to do that, but I was convinced that if I didn't do it, there was a baby there who would be killed. So I did it. And I remember regaining that memory. I remember God just saying to me, "You didn't do anything wrong, Mary. You did nothing wrong. You did nothing wrong." And I know I didn't do anything wrong. And as an adult, if I were in a situation where a child's life was threatened, I would do absolutely anything to avoid the child being harmed. One thing that commonly happens with satanic ritual abuse is that children are put in coffins. And what I know, I'd say this about satanic ritual abuse is we know it happens because there's so many survivors like myself. But when we start trying to speak out, we're made to appear crazy. And so most people are not willing to speak out about it. I know people who come to me and tell me, disclose to me who I'm on Facebook with them. They don't disclose to anyone else. One was a minister. She said she didn't think her church could handle it. And she did go public about being a survivor of child trafficking, but she has not gone public about being a survivor of satanic ritual abuse. And so did anyone question that with my parents? Well, no, but there were people who knew about it. There were other people at my childhood church who knew about it. There were other people at my childhood church who did similar things. For example, I was abused by multiple adults on church property because there were other church leaders, including my father. My parents were highly respected at church. Now, not everyone at the church abused children, but my parents weren't the only ones, so it was easy to hide. I don't know that there were multiple employees at the funeral home who were in on it, but I know there was one employee, and it just stands to reason that the owner of a funeral home has to have employees. They can't be available 24 hours a day. No person could do that. But I've heard from other survivors of satanic ritual abuse things that happen inside funeral homes. And, after the incident I told about, I was taken to the funeral home and more things happened to me there, including communion was desecrated. I was told I needed to eat part of my sister's and drink her. I know I was tricked because not too many years ago, I regained a more full memory of that, and it was a communion wafer placed in my mouth. It took me a long time to remember the taste of it, but it definitely wasn't my sister's. It was the kind of communion wafer that is commonly used by Episcopal Church and Methodist Church, and not the kind of communion, it's not what we used at my childhood church. So I think they were trying to mess with me to where they would make it to where it was difficult for me to be a member of any church, but they didn't do it. I still like taking communion. It's a beautiful Christian ceremony, and my views about Christianity have changed and become more liberal, but I still really treasure taking communion. No one besides me, I have not heard anyone else say my sister's body was. I do have siblings. They inherited my parents' estate, which was a multi-million-dollar estate. I was disinherited. I don't want to have my sister's body exhumed. She's still my sister. I don't want to do that. If I did try to do it, I don't think I'd be able to because, like I say, a brother of mine is executor of the estate. So I don't think I could, even if I tried. But the other thing I thought of is how much trickery is used, because what happened at the church when I know it was my sister's body was soft tissue damage. You couldn't tell that from exhuming the body. And then what happened at the funeral home when they said they crushed her skull with a hammer, was total. But I don't know it was my sister's body. If my husband was murdered today and they started doing all this torture of me and saying that this was my husband's skull that they were, I don't know that I think they could trick me today. I'm 67 years old. I think they could trick me today because I would be in such a emotional state of my, of what was happening to my husband's body that I think they could still trick me. So was it really her body or was it someone else's body? And this is what satanic ritual abuse survivors do. Sometimes they use an animal's body and say it's a person's body. And this is another incident I do want to talk about because I would say this is one of the ones that I would say was satanic ritual or could be considered satanic ritual. I do not know that my parents were worshiping Satan. I absolutely don't know that. They never said they worshiped Satan. They said they were Christians and they went to church 3 times a week. But what they did was they said that they were using this which I would have considered babies. I was 4 or 5, and I had to stand there while they sacrificed them on this, like an altar, and they were at the top of the hill. I was at the bottom of the hill. But I don't know that those were human. I don't even know. How hard is it to trick a 4 or 5-year-old? And I was standing some distance away. What I remember clearly is that my feet hurt. I remember that I was wearing saddle Oxfords, which are hard leather shoes. That's the kind of shoes kids wore at that age. And I remember my feet hurting so bad that I would try to stand different, and then I would stand on the side of my shoe and different things because it was so hard to stand for so long. Now, how long was I standing there? I don't know. I was 4 or 5 years old. It could have been 15 minutes. That could seem like a long time. They just use trickery so much, and then people report this happened to me and they're not believed. Well, yeah, that's why they trick you. I know I was once by someone wearing a police uniform. I really don't think it was a police officer, but that got me afraid of the police, and I didn't remember that until I remembered, I started remembering abuse at age 37, but yeah, that's when I remembered, and I don't think I have been assaulted ever by a police officer, and I'm now able to be less afraid. But I'd be afraid if I saw a police officer and I was going below the speed limit. I would still be afraid and I would slow down. So it wasn't a rational thing. My worst memory is the one of my sister's body being. But if I were going to tell you some of my other memories, you would be surprised they weren't my worst memories. I will never know how often I was abused in rituals. I will never know how often I was abused in rituals. I will never know how often they happen because, thankfully, I don't have all my memories. I don't ever want to remember everything. It's just too hard. And I believe my memories come from God, and they come to me as needed. I have memories when it would be helpful to me in my healing or when it would be helpful to another person in their healing. Recovering memories is really hard. It's emotional. It's really tough. I had hypnosis, but it's not the kind of hypnosis like you see on TV. The hypnotist, the psychologist who hypnotized me just got me in a relaxed state. I didn't even realize I was hypnotized because I knew I could get out of it at any time. I knew I could stop any moment I wanted to. My ex-husband came to my first session of hypnosis because we just wanted to make sure she wasn't telling me what to believe, but she wasn't. And so then after that, rather than him take time off work, it was just better for me to just bring a tape recorder. So that's why I have the tapes. I just wanted, just to know and be able to prove that she didn't ask leading questions, and she absolutely did not ask leading questions. I've transcribed those tapes. There is more known about ritualistic abuse, and that's because there's agencies now offering services to child trafficking survivors. I didn't know I was a child trafficking survivor. I knew my father took of me, but I didn't know that counted as child trafficking because he was my father. I didn't learn that I was a survivor of child trafficking until after I had done all the filming for my Am I Crazy? My Journey to Determine If My Memories Are True, and I was looking for a fiscal sponsor. Someone suggested a trafficking organization, and I'm like, yeah, but I'm not a survivor. And I know so many other survivors of child trafficking who did not realize, and adults who were trafficked like by their boyfriend who didn't realize it was trafficking. So now that that's being recognized, there is a percentage of child trafficking survivors who are also survivors of ritualistic abuse. I personally think every survivor of ritualistic abuse I have ever talked to is most likely a survivor of child trafficking. They were sold, the money probably exchanged hands or something of value. And the something of value may have been access to other, child victims. I mean, my parents would trade with other people and things like that. So that's still child trafficking is whenever anything of value is exchanged for the child's innocence. So I was contacted by a trafficking organization, and they said, when they know I'm a survivor and they know I am willing to, I'm also a professional, I'm a licensed independent clinical social worker, I can do training. So they asked me to do training because they are getting so many of their clients report ritualistic abuse. I mean, it's being so common. And one thing they wanted to know, a really good agency, one thing they want to know is, should we put this on our initial intake form? And I said, I don't think so, because they're not going to tell you right away anyway. People aren't going to say that until they know that they'll be believed. We're so, in the media, in so many ways, we're disbelieved. And so I think it's good that, they come in as child trafficking survivors, and then they get services, and then they're willing to disclose. So I really want to be a voice about the satanic ritual abuse. Just published my memoir in November, My Life Now, Essays by a Child Trafficking Survivor. I'm really proud of it. I worked on it for years. The longest essay is How I Healed. People ask me, how did you heal? I used to have fibromyalgia. I used to be basically disabled with chronic pain, and I'm healthy now. So I wrote out so many different suggestions. I wrote out so many things, very specific things that helped me heal.